I don't know how COVID has been treating all of you, but if I could get over COVID, the first thing that I would do is go and visit my daughter in the United States. But unfortunately, I can't. In the US, at the moment, I checked before I came online today, in the US, there are over 205 deaths that have happened. But did you know that in the United States, each and every year, there are 300,000 people who die from medical errors? 300,000 people who have lost their lives because someone in the medical profession has made a mistake. The three main causes of death: heart failure, cancer, and the third highest is medical errors. In the latest results published by the Canadian Institute of Health, there were over 550 objects unintentionally left inside Canadian surgery patients. Now, let's bring these figures closer to home. And I ask you, what are the figures for Australia from deaths from medical errors or objects left inside unintentionally in patients? No one really knows, because Australia doesn't report these figures, and I don't even think they count them. And the question that I ask you is, if you don't know what the problem is or how big the problem is, how can steps be taken to overcome them? When I decided to publish my book, Battle Scars, the main reason that I wanted to do it was to open up the conversation. Only when you open up the conversation can things improve. Battle Scars is not a book to name or shame any individual or medical or institution. It's basically to open up the story and let people discuss it. So let's go back to 1978, my first battle scars. I went into hospital for my very first operation. When I woke up from the anesthetic, I found that I'd been operated on the wrong leg. Now, there were many errors that took place that day. The first error that was made was by me. I signed 2 hospital forms without reading. If I had read the forms, I would have noticed that the wrong leg had been put on them. The second error that was made was by the nurse who came to prepare the leg for surgery. She changed one form, but she forgot to change the other form. The third mistake that was made was outside the operating theatre. I was not asked, what procedure are you having? If I was asked what procedure I was having, the right leg, left leg would have been brought up. And the fourth error that was made was by the surgical team. They failed to notice the R for the right leg on the X-ray. So if only someone along the way had picked up on these things, that event in 1978 might have been avoided. When the surgeon came to visit me on his hospital rounds the next day, I said, "You've operated on the wrong leg." And he was really quick and he said, "No, I haven't. Whilst you were under the anesthetic, I compared your right knee to your left knee. Your right knee was fine, but your left knee gave a loud crack, so I opened it up to have a look. But don't worry, the good news is there's nothing wrong with your left knee." Well, of course there was nothing wrong with the left knee, because it was the wrong leg. The right leg had the injury. The right leg had the pain. The right leg had the muscle wastage. He and the physiotherapist had been treating the right knee for over a year. The x-ray was for the right knee. He really didn't have a leg to stand on. But then come to think of it, neither did I, as I limped out of the hospital. And that's when my friends started calling me Eileen. So I learned many lessons along the way. The first one was check and double check that you're not making a mistake. If you make a mistake, admit it and do something to rectify the situation. Just because someone is bigger and stronger than you, don't be afraid of them. Be true to yourself and fight for what you believe in is right. And never give up. So those life skills helped me along the way as I progressed to my next medical challenge in 1994. Now, I don't know if any of you remember January 1994, but the east coast of New South Wales had a lot of bushfires, and Sydney was surrounded by bushfires. And, you know, there's a correlation between bushfires and going into premature labour. And I was 3 weeks early and I went to hospital. Not a big deal. Lots of premature babies are more than 3 weeks. But there was more than normal number of expectant mothers going into hospital. The hospital was also short-staffed. And the third thing that happened was that they forgot about me. They put me into a room and they forgot. And by the time they remembered, it was too late. And the damage to my body was extensive. And I had to have 11 operations over the next 12 months to try and put me back together again. I was lucky that I had a brilliant not hand surgeon, but a brilliant surgeon looking after me during this period. And even today, 26 years later, he is still looking after me. And 2 months ago, he performed another procedure on me, which lasted for nearly 3 hours. And I don't think it will be the last. So just from that little mistake, I'm still paying the price for it 26 years later. But there was another complication that happened in 1994, which I wanted to share with you. 10 days after one of the operations that I had excruciating pain in my right arm. And 3 weeks later, I couldn't bend my thumb and my index finger. So I was basically my fist was like this, where I was ready to shoot anyone. And the other thing that I couldn't do was to turn my hand over. So a lot of the functions, like driving a car, pouring water, drinking water, flushing a toilet, a lot of, writing with a pen, all those things couldn't be done. And I was referred to a brilliant hand surgeon called Dr. Ian Isaacs. He did a number of tests, and 6 months later, he sat me down and he said, Dinaaz, I know you've gone through a lot of operations this year. I know you have a lot more operations still to go through, but there has been no improvement in your thumb or your index finger. And if you're going to see any signs of it, we would see it by now. And also your arm is getting weaker each time that I see it. Please give me a chance to also help you. So based on his pleas, I went to hospital. Outside the operating theatre, I was parked in the anaesthetic bay. And it's like Central Railway Station with people going in and out and all over the place. And a nurse comes over to me and she asks me my name, my date of birth, my address. And the next question she asks is, what procedure are you having today? And I looked at her and I thought, I have no idea. I don't know what procedure I'm having today. So she says, you wait right here. And she runs off to obviously tell someone about it, that I don't know what I'm going to be having that day. In the meantime, this man in scrubs comes from the other direction. He's got his surgical cap on, he's got his magnifying glasses on top of his head, and he comes over to me and he says, Dinaaz, I've got to be honest with you. I have absolutely no idea what's wrong with you. I don't know what we're going to find. I don't know what we're going to do after we find it. The only thing I can guarantee you is that you're going to be left with a long scar, about a 10-centimetre scar on your arm. And being the sort of person that I am, I said to him, that's all right, don't worry about it. I don't know what's happening either. So, you stick close to Dr. Isaacs, he'll teach you. Well, this man yanks off his magnifying glasses off his head, he takes off his cap and he goes, Dinaaz, it's me, it's Dr. Isaacs. And I go, whoops, if you don't know and I don't know, we're in trouble. And he said, you know what, my gut instinct says your problem is at the elbow. So based on his gut instinct and my trust in him, I said, okay, let's go for it. When he came on his hospital rounds, he was so excited. He couldn't stop talking about what he had found whilst he was operating. And he said, your muscles had turned white and they looked like chicken. And there were tentacles strangling your nerve. And I said to him, oh, don't worry about all that. Have a look at my thumb. This is the day after the surgery. And my thumb had started to move. And 2 months later, I had full recovery. Now, most of you will be saying, every time Dinaaz goes into hospital, there is a complication here. Thank goodness everything went all right this time. But let me tell you, this time there was another complication. There was a drain left inside my arm. And so Dr. Isaacs had to go back in a month later and take the drain out. And the lessons I learned from this trip was follow your gut. Your gut is so important. And the second lesson is trust. If you trust people, they pull through. So now I'm building up on my resilience and my experience and my life skills, and I'm ready for my next medical challenge, which was 4 years ago. I went into hospital for an emergency procedure for kidney stones. Everything went all right. But, yes, there's another but 10 days later, my arm's in pain. I recognize the timing. I recognize the pain. I recognize the symptoms. And I know exactly the person I need to contact to try and get it resolved. I bring my phone back to my bed and I start looking for Dr. Isaac's contact details. Instead of finding his contact details, I found his obituary. He had passed away and all his notes, all my records had been destroyed. The only two things that I had were chicken and tentacles. That's the only information that I had about my condition. Within 24 hours of experiencing the pain, I saw my first neurologist. He did all these neurological tests on my shoulder, neck, had an MRI of that area as well, had x-rays. They found nothing wrong. I went to my next doctor. He repeated all the tests and he also found nothing wrong. By the 4th month mark, I lost the use of my thumb and index finger. So once again, I'm walking around like this, and I couldn't turn my hand over. So all those functions were once again lost. And you might be wondering, what's so important about the thumb? The thumb is the most important part of your hand. And there are cases where there are accidentally, the thumb's been severed, and the surgeons have replaced it with a big toe. And the thumb is more important than these three fingers, the middle, ring, and little finger, all put together. That's how important the thumb is. So by the 5th month mark, I had seen 20 doctors, and I was given 20 different diagnoses. They just couldn't work out what was wrong. But the two things that all the doctors agreed on by that stage was the problem was in the shoulder. And the other thing that they said was there was going to be absolutely no recovery. In fact, they used the term, like, think of it like a tsunami. Something has gone through, done the damage, and nothing can be done to reverse the situation. But I disagreed with all the doctors because the pain was in the elbow. The only trauma was in the elbow. The muscle wasting was at the elbow. And I had a dotted line on the other arm saying that the problem is over there. And the other thing I couldn't accept was that if Dr. Isaacs had fixed the problem before, then it can be fixed again. So I wasn't willing to just give up. And just when I was feeling a bit low, a friend of mine said, I'm going to pray for divine intervention. And literally, divine intervention came into my life a week later in the form of an email from an astronaut. A totally random astronaut. I've never met him, I've never heard of him, but he sent me an email. When you read the book, you will understand why he sent me the email. Now, he had a really inspirational story. From the age of 5, he always wanted to be an astronaut. When he was in his last year at school, he went to the school counselor and said, I want to be an astronaut. And the school counselor told him, you're not smart enough to be an astronaut, you're not athletic enough to be an astronaut, and you're not good looking enough to be an astronaut. So he thought, no, I'm still going to be an astronaut. So when he was 22, by that stage, he'd finished his university studies. He became an engineer. And he met the minimum requirements to be, to apply for the NASA space program. A few months later, NASA sent him a rejection letter. He sent another application the following year, still got rejected. Another application, still got rejected. He became he did his PhD, and he was a professor at Michigan University. Still, NASA said no, rejected. He then started studying medicine and became a doctor, and he was helping patients in hospitals. Still, NASA said no. He became a pilot and started flying planes. Still rejected, no. He was doing experiments for NASA, but still he got rejected. 16 years of rejections, and he didn't give up. Finally, at the age of 37, he was admitted into the space program. And at the age of 42, he finally flew into space on his first of 3 space shuttle missions. And he taught me a very, very important lesson. If you really want something in life, you just have to keep on going. You can't give up. Don't look at rejections. Rejections make you stronger. And that was the start of my journey. And I started doing something every single day to achieve my one and only goal of saving my arm. So I was behind a computer 24/7. I did so much research on the drugs. I learned about the IV cannulas, the gauges. I learned about the anatomy of the arm, the muscles, the nerves, the veins, the arteries. I learned about all the tests that had been performed and why those tests had been performed. And I found lots of discrepancies in the tests. And that's when I realized they were doing all the testing in the wrong spot. You know, the testing was not done where I'd been pointing to. And at that point in time, I also thought, I've got to find a doctor. I've got to choose a doctor. So I made a list of all the hand surgeons that were available. And I put them all into a spreadsheet. And I started giving them, you know, stars based on what they could and couldn't do. And I wasn't looking at their academic qualifications, but rather things like, how will I be able to deal with them and they deal with me? So I chose someone who was young. He had a nice smile. He had gentle eyes. His date of birth was the same as mine. And we both supported the same football team. And this is not a joke. I really did that. But unfortunately, I had to wait for 5 more months till I could see him. And then at the same time, I was thinking, I can't possibly be the only person in the whole world that this has happened to. So now I'm on my next research project. I'm trying to find a medical twin. And I'm putting in so many word combinations into Google. And 3 weeks later, I found on the 3rd page, I saw the date, May 5. This publication, this article, this paper had been published on May 5. And May 5 is my birthday. And that's the only reason I stopped to have a look. I clicked on the link. The title of the paper was Isolated Thumb Interphalangeal Flexor Weakness Following Total Hip Arthroplasty. In layman's terms, that means the thumb doesn't bend after a hip surgery. So I got onto the email, and the paper had been written by 3 doctors. And I sent an email to the main author asking him for help. Within an hour, he sent me such a long email with so many questions. It took me another day to answer all his questions. He came back with more questions. I answered them, and that was how I got in touch with this man. His name was Professor Patrick Weinrauch, a hip surgeon in Brisbane. And he helped me along a path that spanned 14 months and 49 doctors I saw in Melbourne, in Sydney, and in Brisbane. I was also communicating with doctors in the United States, in India, Sweden, and South Korea. Finally, I had someone helping me. And then 5 months later, I got to meet my surgeon, the one with the nice smile and the gentle eyes. And when he saw me, he had no idea what was wrong with me. He organized a few tests, and he put forward my case to a whole lot of hand surgeons, and they all said the same thing. Surgery is not the answer to my problem, and it will not resolve any issues. But at the 3-month mark, he said, Dinaaz, I can't operate. This is after 14 months of the journey. He said, I can't operate. It goes against my grain to operate when I don't know what the problem is. And, you know, I might make it worse. I just can't take that risk. And I said, well, there's another option. It might get worse or it might get better. But I cannot accept this, being in pain every single day without trying. He reluctantly agreed to operate. And outside the operating theatre, I was asked that question. So what procedure are you having today? And this time I could say, I'm having neurolysis of the anterior interosseous nerve and the median nerve. And it's amazing how time and this journey had changed my knowledge of my arm. 2 days later, my arm was not paralysed anymore. And 4 months later, I had full recovery. And you can see everything works perfectly well. 6 weeks after the surgery, I flew to Brisbane to meet Professor Weinrauch. We'd never spoken over the phone, we'd never met, and he had no idea that I was his 9 o'clock appointment. That meeting changed my life and his life as well. A little while later, he got back to me and he said, Dinaaz, you've got to write this book. You've got to write a book about your journey. And that's how Battle Scars came about. But, you know, this book has opened up a lot of opportunities for me. I'm now a resilient speaker, helping organisations and individuals and teams to overcome challenges that they thought they never could. I've also, 2 weeks ago, I started the Patient Safety for All group for Australians. And I've also joined another group called Patient Safety Movement. And I don't know if you realise that on the 17th of September every year, the World Health Organization has put aside a day for patient safety. And that was only about 2 weeks ago. And last week I got an email from them of all the 11 takeaway messages for patients and their families. So I'm going to read these out. Recognize the system isn't perfect. Stay engaged in your own healthcare process. Recognize that your voice matters. Don't be intimidated. Speak up. Get a second opinion. Shop around. Follow your gut. Double check everything. There are social and regional disparities in patient care. Healthcare workers are not to blame. The system has flaws. We're all in this together. We can't put total responsibility of our care in the medical profession only. We also have to take a part. So, ladies and gentlemen, our well-being and that of our families is in our hands.